I'm Bill Good, and welcome to those of you joining us this morning on the Chorus Radio Network. We're going to talk a little bit about mining and what it means to the BC economy this morning. Last week we heard from the Business Council of BC and the BC Chamber of Commerce about how BC can become a more prosperous province for all British Columbians. And they're challenging you and me to recognize that they have to support some growth, expansion, and resource development if you want jobs for the future and for the government to be able to pay the bills for government programs. Philip Hochstein is president of the Independent Contractors and Business Association of BC, and Zoë Younger is vice president of corporate affairs for the Mining Association of British Columbia. And I welcome both to the program. Philip Hochstein, we were talking during the news about the disconnect I felt in the past few months when I visited places like Prince Rupert and Prince George and Osoyoos and Kelowna. The disconnect that those areas feel, and particularly Prince Rupert and Prince George, with what we now call Metro Vancouver, used to be the Lower Mainland. Bill,
I think it's. I'm going to accept responsibility for that on behalf of the business community. The business community hasn't done a good job linking the economic prosperity that comes from mining or from forestry to what happens down here. I was up in Williams Lake talking about the new prosperity mine that they're trying to build. And, when I went up there, I thought, the beer people should be here supporting the mine. Because if this project goes ahead, there will be 1,000 construction workers. After a hard day pounding nails, having a cold one is probably what you want to do. So the sale in beer will go up. The sale in trucks will go up. The sale of tires will go up, retail cars, trucks, all those kinds of things. So that's all tied to economic activity, not only in Williams Lake, but around the province. And unless we do a better job explaining how interlocked the economy is, from resources in the interior or up north to the economic success down here, to the selling of paper and services and engineering services that may be down here, then we'll always have a tough time getting the population of British Columbia to accept the economic development that we need.
But the connection that has to be made, Zoë Younger, I drew a lot of heat on Twitter a week or two ago because someone suggested that we didn't need to raise more money for transit, that we were all paying enough taxes now. And I said, well, no, we're not actually. And that person took it to mean that I thought he should pay more tax. What I was really saying is we need more revenue in order to provide the kind of infrastructure, the kind of bridges or roadways, whatever, that we need. We need more revenue, and that revenue more and more has to come from mines, from LNG, from developing resources.
Absolutely. And you hit on the nail on the head when you talk about what we contribute as an industry to that spending that government does to build infrastructure. We contributed $9.2 billion to the provincial economy in
$9.2 billion.
$9.2 billion in 2012, and that's a huge amount of money that we've contributed. And that money doesn't just get spent in Prince George or in Burns Lake or in Prince Rupert. That gets spent in Vancouver. There are over 600 mining companies and junior exploration companies that are headquartered downtown Vancouver. This is the hub for mining across Canada, and not only are we generating jobs and revenue in the rural parts of British Columbia, but we're also doing that right here in Vancouver.
Now, Philip Hochstein mentioned the Prosperity Mine. If it goes ahead, I'm told it would generate $11 billion in added GDP. That's the equivalent of a Canada Line, a Caribou Connector, a new SkyTrain, a Portman Bridge, and a South Fraser Perimeter Road.
Absolutely. I mean, where does the money come from for these infrastructure projects? It's clear that, and when people get paid to go work up there, you can guarantee that the government will take its fair share. both from the workers and from the suppliers and from the mining companies. So the government coffers will go up by $5.5 billion for British Columbia over the life of that mine.
And that's just one mine.
That's just the Prosperity mine over the life of that mine. I can't speak for all of the mines, but certainly I know of Prosperity. And that money will go to, you're right, we would have no debate about TransLink and how to pay for it if the government had $5.5 billion more. We'd have no debate about expanding, the road system and the port system if the government had $5.5 billion more. And that means not taking more money from you and me, just making the pie bigger. I think British Columbians have finally woken up, and fighting over the economic pie doesn't make sense. Making the economic pie bigger helps all of us. And I think that's what projects like the mining industry produce, is something that makes the economic pie bigger so we all can have a...
But Zoë Younger, Mr. Hochstein said he accepts responsibility on behalf of the business community. That was a generous thing for him to say, I think.
It was.
But I would say that your industry has done a poor job of highlighting the very thing we're talking about this morning. All people think, many, when they hear mining, is environmental degradation. They don't think prosperity. They don't think revenue for health care or education.
It's true. And, I think we can do a better job of talking about the benefits that we bring to the communities. We've got only 21 operating mines in British Columbia right now. It's not a huge number. They're very rare. It's actually very hard to take a project from a deposit into production. And we spend a lot of time working on bringing things online. When we do, the products that we produce, we use across the Lower Mainland, across BC, and across the world, and we don't do a good job of telling people not just the economic benefits that we bring, but the benefits that mining brings to people's day-to-day lives. We need to get people understanding that things like a hybrid car can use 30 to 50 pounds of copper in the electrical systems. Well, that copper has to come from somewhere, and you can't get it from recycled copper. Even if you recycled all of the copper that you could on the planet, you'd still have a huge deficit in terms of global consumption. And so we need to actually start connecting the dots that, the materials that we have every day. If you want a pacemaker, you need mining to get that.
Explain that.
Well, the metals and the materials that go into a pacemaker, the electronics, those materials are all mined out of the ground. And so you have to find those deposits, mine them, and refine them and process them and turn them into that. Stainless steel is another really good example. You need coal to make steel. And if you make steel, you can build things like SkyTrains.
That's something that boggles my mind, is the knee-jerk reaction against coal, for example.
Yeah.
When you need coal to make steel.
Absolutely.
And you need steel to have a SkyTrain or a BC ferry.
Yeah.
Or, just so many things. And yet people say coal and they go, oh, no, we don't want that.
Well, and I think part of what I really is important to me is I came into this industry and really with a critical eye and looked at it, and I came from forestry and oil and gas before. I've spent some time in the resource sectors, and I'll be honest that the mining industry, in my view, does its business better than any other industry, and certainly any other jurisdiction. We do it better here in British Columbia. We are very good at what we do. We are incredibly mindful of the planet. We have a robust regulatory framework here and huge sort of concern and awareness around the potential environmental impacts of our projects. And we actually have a plan in place for how to mitigate all the potential impacts and remediate the site and reclaim the site afterwards, before we even put a shovel in the ground to build it.
Yeah, look, our regulatory environment is second to none in the world. And where would you rather develop a mine and ensure that the environment is properly looked after, here or Chile, where the regulatory system is less than robust. So and the people up in Williams Lake for the Prosperity mine, they care about the environment too. They live there. They don't want to see it degraded in any way. They'll watch to make sure that the construction is done responsibly and that mining is done responsibly. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. I think you do it, and our regulatory environment make sure that it isn't a zero-sum game.
And I think one of the challenges that we have, especially with the environmental assessment process the way it is now, is when you have these panel hearings and you have these divisive, confrontational processes in place, it makes people feel like they have to pick a side, that there's somehow a good and a bad, there's somehow a right and a wrong. And I think at the end of the day, that's you're kind of driving at the wrong question there. It's not a yes or no question. It's a how. How are we going to do the project that we want to do in a responsible way? How are we going to make sure that we're developing the resources in a way that benefits everybody in the communities?
Your thought, your thoughts, 604-280-9898, toll free 1-877-399-9898.
This is The Bill Good Show on CKNW.
Talking to Zoë Younger, Vice President of Corporate Affairs with the Mining Association of B.C., and Philip Hochstein, President of the Independent Contractors and Business Association of B.C., and what they are trying to do is very similar to what the Business Council and the Chamber was trying to do with its report on prosperity, talking about the link between what is done in the north and the interior in terms of developing resources means to all of you listening this morning. And I welcome your calls. Specifically, Phil Hochstein talked about 1,000 jobs, 700 direct mining jobs if that Prosperity mine goes ahead in the Williams Lake area.
It's 1,000 construction jobs, which of course I care dearly about, but in the running of the mine is 700 jobs, 700 well-paying. I think the average is over $100,000 a year in mining. That's 700 families, 700 paychecks, 700 people paying taxes that they otherwise wouldn't be paying, which would work its way in part down here to help with our transit and our sewage systems and all the other things that a city needs. So it's important to the province that projects like New Prosperity or any of the mining projects that Zoe's people are trying to get to market happen. So because it makes all our lives better. It doesn't make any of them worse.
Let me get to some calls. Brian, good morning.
Good morning. I fully support what you're talking about. What my concern has always been, unfortunately, it ties back to the HFC, and that's where if companies are going up north to build the north, and they have large capital expenditures in their business to go up there, and we have a free trade agreement with Alberta. If I'm going out to buy $1 million of equipment and I want to be an Alberta company or a BC company, where would I register? Because I save 7% by being in Alberta, and as a result, the BC provincial government loses out on that revenue. They lose out on the corporate taxes from the businesses, and it's something that was never brought up when we fought this HST GST fiasco.
Well, we live in a very competitive environment, and tax structure is part of our competitiveness issues. And the fact that Alberta is drawing on all its resources up with that oil sands allows them to have no sales tax. So it is a lot more. So they're using resources to benefit themselves and to have a competitive advantage. We have to do similar things.
Russell, good morning.
Hi there. Yeah. Basically, when I listen to anybody on the radio, such as these guys or the other side of the fence, I think there's somewhere in the middle that no one wants to go because then they have to admit they're wrong. Why don't you just come out and say, you know what? There's going to be an environmental impact. This is how we're going to contain it. And you guys just won't say that. I'm for this. So I want to make that clear because I believe in the jobs. I believe there's areas of the country where you can put mines in, you can do things to create jobs without, bringing it to downtown Vancouver as an example. So where the mass population is. So why don't you guys just come out and tell the people that there's going to be environmental impact instead of trying to make it sound like there's not going to be.
Zoë Younger, how do you plead?
Thanks, Russell. It's a good point. And let me tell you, Russell, this one's for you. There will be an environmental impact when we mine. And we will put plans in place to mitigate that impact and to manage that impact and to be as responsible to the environment as we can possibly be based on science. So I think you're right. I think there is a need for us to be really transparent about that. I think that's what the environmental assessment process that we have in BC is about. It's about looking at what are those potential impacts going to be in a very public way, having the public debate and the discourse around how best to manage those potential impacts, and putting in place plans to remediate sites back to a natural state once the life of the mine has come to an end.
I think most people listening really love the city of Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what it would look like if we hadn't cut trees.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, we look at not just the city of Vancouver, but small towns across
Everywhere.
BC, everywhere, anywhere where you have
can't
a large
live
population.
someplace and not cause some environmental destruction.
Absolutely. And, I think what's important to note is that in a city, or in an urban environment, or in a neighborhood, you don't have the same comprehensive controls in place. You're not doing water quality analysis. You're not doing, regular environmental monitoring on everything that happens or gets discharged from that house or from that building. And at a mine site, you do. You know everything that's happening on that mine site. You know where every runoff goes. You know where the...
Well, I would argue that we are getting better, even in the cities, though. I mean, I think that there was a time, a generation or two ago, when people didn't recognize the damage they were doing to things like salmon streams. We're much more aware of it now, and there is more regulation, and there is a much greater effort to mitigate the damage. But you can't build anything and not do some damage.
It's all about balance, Bill. At the end of the day, it's balance. You can't have zero economic activity and zero impact on the environment that would be mitigated, or you can have, clear-cut everything. None of us in the business community is ever talking about that. Look, we have families. My kids want me to recycle. They pound that thing into me every day. So we have to balance, and that's our job. That's government's job, to balance the interests so that everything is looked after properly.
Keith, hi.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Just as a PR suggestion, I've lived up north, and I think one of the things that bothers people up there is the fact that every time we talk about the benefits of a spin-off of a whatever project, it's all directed towards Vancouver and SkyTrains, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I know that you mentioned health and so on, but I think the emphasis is always on Vancouver, and I think that irritates people up north.
I know it does.
Secondly, I, as a medical student, worked in 3 different mines in the Kootenays and in Merritt, and I went back to visit those mines this summer, and I can't see anything. They've been closed down, and nature's taken over them. So even with the bad techniques of the past, nature does tend to reclaim itself. So,
Zoë Younger?
I think that's very true. And I think, to your first question, you're talking about the disconnect between Vancouver and the rural populations in BC and the benefits in rural communities that we also want to talk about. And that, the range of benefits to communities is huge. Mining is actually something that builds communities. Not only do you have the direct jobs at the mine site, but now all of a sudden you've got more teachers coming and wanting to live there. You've got more doctors coming to the area that want to live there. You've got a more vibrant community. You've got more arts. You've got more culture. You have more people living in an area, making it more fun to live there and a better place to be and a better place to raise your family. And that's a huge part of what we can contribute in those rural communities.
My thanks to Zoë Younger and to Philip Hochstein. We must break for the news headlines at the bottom of the hour, and then it's time for Norman Spector and Michael Byers, our Monday morning quarterbacks from the left and the right.